Hello and welcome to the WRAP, WRAL's political podcast. It is just a couple of days after the 2024 elections, and we had a whole lot of races on the ballot, a whole lot of change in North Carolina. Basically almost the entire council of state that runs the executive branch of state government is changing. Big moves on the way for the legislature potentially as well, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But of course, top line, Donald Trump wins North Carolina and every other swing state in his return to the White House. Big election there, but North Carolina voters, being North Carolina voters, still elected a Democrat for governor.
That's right, and on down and in other statewide races.
Yes. This is your host, Will Doran. I am here with my colleague Paul Spain. We're going to be breaking down these races for you. Paul, what was your main takeaway on why North Carolinians moved a little bit further to the right this year in the race for presidency than we saw in 2020?
Well, there was a red wave across the country, and if you look at some of the other battleground states, or swing states, as people call them, they went even further to the right. That includes Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Michigan. Wisconsin is the only other swing state that did not move as far to the right, or that I should say that moved less to the right than North Carolina, if that's grammatically correct. But obviously, you can look at it and see that the electorate had its own opinions on this race. They care about the economy. They didn't think the current administration had done enough. I'm not an analyst. I didn't speak. Voters spoke and made their voices heard at the polls. We won't get into why they voted the way they did. But what was really interesting is that North Carolina didn't move to the right quite as much as some other states, and I think that gives Democrats some hope for the future. Political analysts told us that North Carolina's cities are becoming a larger and larger portion of our electorate here, and they're liberal places. Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and Charlotte are liberal places, and they're growing, and so they're having a bigger effect. And so that's why, although Trump won this state and he improved on his performance from 2020, he only swung it by about 1.5 percentage points, give or take a little bit. So, and that was a small margin compared to other states. So if you're a Democrat and you're feeling bad about these results, the party representatives here will say, hey, look, there's some reasons to be encouraged. Our state is still purple, you could argue, and could swing either way in any given election.
Yeah, I know that at least as of a few years ago, North Carolina had the second largest rural population in the entire United States. Only Texas has more rural residents than North Carolina does. So for a lot of political analysts, the fact that we don't vote like Texas, that we vote more like a battleground swing state, was pretty notable. And, like you said, even though we've been booming overall as a state, more than half of the counties shrank in the 2010 through 2020 decade. The census showed, just all of the growth that we have is in those urban areas. And so, it's Democrats keep thinking that, okay, this is the year that we're finally going to be competitive because of these growth patterns. And it did not turn out to be the case. This was the whole country went to the right. Colorado was the only state in the entire nation that went left compared to 2020. Every other state in the country went to the right. So I guess one way of looking at it is that North Carolina was maybe the third least right-moving state after Colorado and Wisconsin.
Right. That is another way to look at it. And again, Trump did improve on his margin from last time, but if you're looking at trends, there are positive signs there for Democrats.
Yes. Another positive sign for Democrats, of course, is Josh Stein winning the governor's race in just, frankly, a landslide, 15-point win. I mean, this is the biggest margin of victory since, Mike Easley, 2 decades ago. No one that we talked to really expected this, but you know what? The WRAL news poll published a week before the election showed Josh Stein winning by 15 points, and that is how much he won by. So polls weren't all wrong this year.
Right. And, obviously people have their criticisms of polls, and rightfully so, because you can go back to 2016 and see how wrong they were. But I do think people have made adjustments, pollsters have made adjustments to get more accurate. In fact, while WRAL nailed it, another pollster nailed it. Was it Elon or ECU? One of the others also had Stein winning.
ECU had the 15-point margin for Stein as well.
By 15% percentage points. And I remember thinking before the election, like, I have not in my adult life seen any margin that large. Most of our statewide races are decided by less than 10 points. So, I remember seeing that and saying, like, oh, people will come home. Republicans will come home for Robinson. They did not. Did not, which was fascinating.
Yeah, even Steve Troxler, the agriculture commissioner, who is always, among the most popular politicians on the ballot, winning the most total votes, he hasn't had a 15-point win.
No.
So that was quite notable. And I think we saw that translate down the ballot as well. We ran some of the numbers, looked up some of the federal data, because you can find this and see which candidates put up ads on television. And there were 14 statewide races other than the presidency, but the 10 council of state and then 4 judicial races. And in those 14 races, 7 of them, the Democratic candidates had enough money to put up ads. And in those 7 races, Democrats won at least 5, maybe 6. The 6th race is the Supreme Court seat that's still, potentially headed to a recount. We don't know the result of that one yet. The Republican Jefferson Griffin is up on Democratic incumbent Justice Allison Riggs in that case, but still a little bit too close to call as of the time we're recording this on Friday. But in general, when the Democrats had enough money to get up ads on TV, they won. And a lot of times they did it by tying their Republican opponents to Mark Robinson. Anyone who's turned on a TV in the last month has seen those ads saying, my opponent loves to shake hands with Mark Robinson and thinks he's the bee's knees. And, you fact check some of these ads for PolitiFact. Some of them were a little misleading. Some of them were absolutely accurate. But either way, that was clearly the Democratic strategy.
Right. And if you're thinking about the future, there may not be another Mark Robinson to tie candidates to, but I guarantee you how this will work is in 2026 when U.S. Senator Tom Tillis is up for re-election. He's a Republican. And in 2028, Democrats in North Carolina will go to big donors and say, look at 2024. Look at our ground game and how we were able to sort of blunt the Trump effect and how far your money went in some of these other statewide races. They will say, your money, you can get bang for your buck in North Carolina. And so there will be more, many, many millions more dollars spent on North Carolina because if the conditions are right, it's a winnable state for certainly for Republicans, but also for Democrats.
Yeah, and, not that we are necessarily already starting to cover the 2026 midterms. They are still a couple of years away, but one name that's been floated as a potential challenger in the GOP primary to Tom Tillis is Mark Robinson. Tom Tillis is not very popular among the GOP base. The state party voted to censure him a couple of years ago at the state convention. He's seen as a little bit too moderate on issues like gay marriage and immigration. And, could he have a challenger from the right? Could that be Mark Robinson? We asked Robinson's campaign manager at his election night event where he ended up giving his concession speech what his plans were, and they said this is way too early to be talking about this. No one has been talking about a Senate run. We had been just fully focused on this race for governor, trying to run through the tape on this. And Robinson said in his speech that he could come back to politics, but for right now, he just wants to take some time to reassess and be with his family.
Right, and so we'll all be watching to see where he ends up, if it's still in politics. And then, of course, despite his answer, we will continue to speculate about 2026.
Exactly. One other big federal race that was a bit of a surprise to people here was the 1st District race up in northeastern North Carolina, and that featured the Democratic incumbent Don Davis against Republican challenger Lori Buckout. That district has been moving to the right. It was about back in 2016, it voted about 9 points to the left of the state. 2020, it was only 2 points to the left of the state. 2022, it was 2 points to the right of the state. So that was, if you just look at the numbers on paper, that was a great district for Republicans this year to try to pick up and flip. Obviously the U.S. House is on razor-thin margins right now. But Don Davis held on and actually won by a decent margin considering the fact that Trump won here, and this is a rural district that he was running in. I think immigration played a big part in that. The Republicans clearly saw immigration as the key issue. They had plenty of ads hammering him over that. But the fact is, Davis has been one of the most moderate or even conservative Democrats in the entire country on immigration issues.
Mm-hmm.
He voted with Republicans on a bill this summer slamming Kamala Harris as the failed border czar for the Biden administration.
Right.
He was one of, I think, only 5 or 6 Democrats in the whole U.S. House to vote on that. And
history shows he played that right.
Exactly. So, he held on and won. Could that, history of being moderate, being willing to work with Republicans, give him a little bit more leverage in the next U.S. House to deliver for North Carolina, considering that it does look like it's going to be a Republican-held House, and he is far and away the most moderate Democrat here in North Carolina? That remains to be seen. But we're going to take a little break right here, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about, we'll keep talking about the legislative branch, but this time at the state level, what's going on with the state legislature after these elections. Stick around. And we are back. Thank you for listening to our breakdown of the 2024 elections. Paul, you have done a whole lot of reporting on the state legislative races. Republicans kept their supermajority in the state Senate, maybe not in the state House.
That's right. The supermajority is a huge deal in North Carolina because government is split, right? In the legislature, Republicans are in control. And so with a Democratic governor, though, as we've had for the last 8 years, and Roy Cooper, he can try to veto legislation he doesn't like. Well, if they get what's called a supermajority, then they can override his vetoes and push through whatever they want.
And they have.
And they've done that to pass abortion laws, to pass new education laws, to pass laws about transgender kids and their rights, things like that. And so it was, for Josh Stein, certainly, as the gubernatorial nominee, very important for Democrats to break the Republican supermajority, and so that they cannot override his vetoes, right? In the Senate, the Republicans need to keep 30 seats. It looks like they did that. In the House, they need to keep 72 of the 120 seats. It looks like right now they are only leading in 71. It looks like they're going to come 1 seat short. Several people they thought might lose won, and vice versa. There were some people they thought would win that did not, and that includes incumbent Republican Ken Fontenot out in eastern North Carolina. They thought he was going to win re-election. He lost.
Yeah, and Fontenot's district is 98% Wilson County, and that's a county that voted for Trump.
That's right. And that's an area where some people may look and say, hey, there was a Mark Robinson effect there, because Ken Fontenot was a vocal Robinson defender that may not have played well there. There's another race, incumbent Frank Sossamon. He's a Republican. He's trailing by about 180 votes. And there's still some provisional ballots to be counted, so he could request a recount, and we could see how that goes. But right now, it appears that Democrat Brian Kahn will beat him. And there's a Robinson effect there, too. Frank Sossamon continued to campaign with Mark Robinson even after that CNN report came out that alleged that he made these racist and sexist comments on a pornographic website. Now, of course, Robinson says it wasn't him. He sued CNN for defamation. So there's that. But after that happened, most Republicans distanced themselves.
Exactly. Trump stopped appearing on stage with Robinson, which was a complete 180. He was always,
they were pals.
Yeah.
Trump wouldn't get on a stage with him. The Republican Governors Association, which typically spends millions of dollars to help Republican candidates in swing states like this, pulled out. They stopped airing ads for Mark Robinson. and other legislative candidates wouldn't go near him. Even when they were at the legislature to pass a recovery bill for Helene after Hurricane Helene hit, Robinson, as lieutenant governor, presided over the state Senate, and people did not go up and shake his hand that first round.
And there was a big Republican press conference before they voted on that bill, and there was one Republican who was not there at that press conference, and it was Mark Robinson.
Right. And so you can look at Fontenot, defender of Robinson, losing, and then you can look at Sossamon, someone who continued to campaign with him, appears to have lost, although it's not official yet, and say, look, that mattered. Those ties mattered in those races. Another race where it looks like Helene mattered is out west in Asheville, in a Buncombe County seat held by Democrat Lindsey Prather. When legislators redrew the election map last year, they put Prather in a new right-leaning seat that her voters in that new district supported Trump by a 9-point margin in the 2020 election. Well, guess what? Prather won. Prather won by 3 points even. She's not even in recount territory.
That was the most shocking result of the night to me. Obviously, Wilson is in our backyard here at WRAL. We're paying a lot of attention to that race. But then, you're kind of scrolling down the list and, seeing, who did what. And he said, wait a second. Lindsey Prather held on. I mean, yeah, she was in a district that voted for Trump by 9 points, like you said, in 2020. North Carolina moved to the right since then. So this should have been a district that a Republican won by double digits. Instead, she wins it by 3. And that was just frankly, a stunning result.
Right. And so you and I were both like, we've got to talk to them about this. I talked to the Republicans and said, I called the House, the Republican House caucus director and asked him, hey, do you think the storm played a role? And he said, absolutely. He said, not only do we think there were some Republican voters who were displaced after the flooding and all that from Helene, it also changed our plans. We had planned on attacking Prather and saying, she's a far-left liberal, she's out of touch with Buncombe County voters, this and that. But when the storm hit, they had to suspend some of these ads that they had planned. They couldn't go on the offensive. People are digging out of their houses and scooping water out of them. And they can't just keep launching these attacks saying like, oh, sure, I know you don't have food or electricity or water, but Lindsey Prather is a lib. Like you can't keep doing that.
That wouldn't work, yeah.
And so that's of course I'm sort of exaggerating here, but that's how a lot of campaigns go. But it's considered poor form to do that in the wake of a disaster, and so they didn't. And so Republicans said, it disrupted their messaging plan. I think it's fair to say that in one way or another, it did have an impact. And then you called Lindsey Prather and said, what do you think? They said, Republicans said this. Do you agree? And she said, yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, she's, under no illusions that this was an easy win or even a possible win, even though it turned out into a win for her. But, she said it took her days to even be able to leave her own neighborhood in Candler, which is right outside of Asheville. And she said once she did, everything was so devastated. She said she basically just shut down her campaign, drove into Asheville to the temporary, emergency operations center there and just started making calls, to people in the legislature, in the governor's office, and just trying to kind of be the, the go-between for state government to, people, boots on the ground in Asheville. Because, that's her job. She represents that area in the legislature. That is
and I imagine that her incumbency helped her as well, because let's say her Republican candidate shows up and says, let me help. I'm sure that's all fine and welcome. But if they have unanswered questions, someone who's not in government may not be able to give you the answer. Well, Prather is already the incumbent. She has people's phone numbers. She's in a position where she can help. And so I imagine that helped her too.
Yeah, and then she told me, it wasn't just, stopping the meet and greets on the campaign trail. It was also they shut down all of those, political fundraising texts that we've all been getting just day and night. They shut all those down, and what she did instead was she took her list of phone numbers, because every campaign has a gigantic list of phone numbers that they're texting people constantly. And instead of asking for money, she started just sending out hey, this is where you can find food. This is where you can find water. Even though we don't have electricity and so you can't, see what's on the internet or what's on TV, don't forget that public radio is still broadcasting and is, playing recordings of these, emergency meetings. And she said, candidly, we know that people hate these text messages that they get from politicians.
Oh, yeah.
And so we weren't really sure what the reaction would be to making that switch to using it almost like a PSA. But she said it was an overwhelming response. People started texting back, and yes, there are human beings who can see when you text back to those political texts. And people started texting back and, just, letting their emotions flow or asking her, saying, oh, okay, you're a politician. Can you find my relative who I haven't been able to get in touch with? Can you check in on law enforcement and see if they've, know what this person's status is? And so, that appears to have engendered a lot of goodwill for her out there as well. And, what should have been a very easy, cakewalk Republican victory to secure the supermajority, even if Republicans do end up losing these two, kind of central to eastern North Carolina seats you were talking about.
Right. These that could be recounts.
Right. As long as they had just won this, heavily gerrymandered seat out in western North Carolina, they would have kept the supermajority anyways.
That's right. These two in near us with Fontenot and Sossamon, the two incumbent Republicans, even if they lose, if Prather had lost, also they'd keep the supermajority. It wouldn't matter.
It wouldn't matter.
And so and it's funny. It's funny how things happen, and I'm sort of spitballing here, but I do PolitiFact. You've done PolitiFact. And before the election happened, we saw lots of people speculating like, people, the voting machines, are they going to be set up? Are people going to have enough opportunity to vote? Well, absolutely they did. There were no complaints about Western North Carolina on Election Day.
Yeah.
It went, by all accounts, pretty smoothly. And they wondered, would it dilute the Republican vote in statewide races? We didn't see that. Trump won easily. But then it's just this little pocket where it just seemed to, level the playing field again, and she emerged on top, something no one expected.
You know what? I think people like it when government delivers for them. And that was, an instance that they saw that happening. And, maybe that also explains some of the presidential results. They didn't think the government's been delivering them over the past few years, and so they voted for change.
Right.
We've got more elections coming up in 2026, in the next 2 years, incumbents have to figure out ways to deliver for their constituents, or else, they might be looking for a job.
That's right.
All right. Thank you for listening this week. That is our post-election recap. We'll be back next time. Stay tuned.